So if we kind of just take a look at some of these flats, you can see where sort of basic shapes emerge. So for instance, with these pocket details, and what we'll be doing towards the end of the lesson is actually utilizing the shape tools to create a pocket. But for these examples, you can see that this kangaroo pocket here is more or less a rectangle with some modifications to it. Additionally, this pocket on the sleeve here is also a modified rectangle with a square. This one is a modified square. And then you can also, utilize shapes and your drawings to create more dimensional pockets, whether that means you're having a flap like this one where it's slightly overlapping. You can indicate things like snap closures if it's showing through on this pocket, or you can utilize shapes of different kinds, of course, to create a very dimensional kind of like billowing pocket like this one on this backpack here. When we begin to work with shapes, you can, of course, freehand draw everything, but a lot of the times that is going to leave you pretty open to making some mistakes of continuity, whether that is the angles don't end up right or the lengths of the sides don't end up right. So Illustrator, fortunately, has a whole variety of preset shape tools. And so you can see in my toolbar, which is over here on the left-hand side, if I click this shape here, which the default will be the rectangle tool. And so if I long press on the rectangle tool, you'll see that there's actually 6 different options here. And so that includes the rectangle, the rounded rectangle, which means it's just the rectangle with rounded corners, the ellipse, which is functionally what we use to create circles. Polygons will create any shape of at least 3 sides, the star tool, and the flare tool. So we can kind of go through each one of them one at a time. And, just to begin getting familiar, there's really 2 ways, more than 2 ways, but to start, there's 2 easy ways to start utilizing the shapes. So I have my rectangle tool selected. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to click default fill and stroke, so it'll be black and white to start. And the fill, of course, represents what is the color of the inside of the shape, whereas the stroke is the path, functionally. And so the stroke is going to be the outline. So we have a white inside with a black outline. If I then just take my tool and I just drag, I will then draw a shape. So it's drawing a rectangle for me in the constraints of how I'm setting it. So I can make it extremely small. I can make it really, really large. I can do whatever I want just by clicking and dragging. Now, I'm just going to set this as a different color to make it a little bit more fun. So it's yellow now. And the principle applies the same to all of these shapes. If I select the ellipse tool, you'll see that I can just click and drag, and I can create my shapes. Now, we'll get into shortly what if you want it to be a perfect circle, or what if you want it to be a perfect square. There's easy ways to do that with some keyboard shortcuts. And additionally, if you become more familiar with the software, you'll see that there's an abbreviation next to the rectangle and the ellipse tool, so that's M and L, respectively. So that just means if I were to press M on my keyboard, I am now utilizing the rectangle tool. So keyboard shortcuts are super helpful for understanding Adobe softwares because each software has their own in some sense. There is some overlap between softwares, but it'll make working within the software itself a lot quicker and a lot easier once you get used to it. Instead of having to go and find the tool, you can just press the key and it will give you the tool that you're looking for. So with the other shape tools, we have the polygon tool and the star tool. So the polygon tool is a little bit different. And that is to say that the polygon tool initially demands to be tapped. And so what I mean by that is if you go back to the rectangle or the ellipse tool, you can see that, of course, we can draw shapes by dragging. However, we can also click or tap, we can also click or tap, and you'll receive this window. So it'll say rectangle or ellipse, and it will ask you how wide do you want it to be and how tall do you want it to be. Now, currently, my software is in points. One fun fact about Adobe Illustrator and other Adobe softwares is it will convert units for you no matter what. So if I say I want a 2-inch by 3-inch rectangle, it's going to be kind of big, it will just draw that up for me it will convert it to points for me. But I can just click and I can set perfect dimensions. If I'm working on something and I know it has to be a 2 by 2-inch square, then I can just write 2 by 2 and it will set that for me perfectly. And if I go and print this out, it's going to be 2 inches by 2 inches as long as I don't do anything to it. So that being said, you can do that with both the rectangle, you can do that with the ellipse, the polygon, and the star tool. The polygon tool is a little bit different though, because if you're utilizing the polygon tool, it's going to ask you two questions, and that's going to be the radius, so the distance from the center of the shape to the outmost point, and then it's going to ask you how many sides you want. So if you say 5 sides, it's going to draw you a pentagon, and if you then select the polygon tool again and just drag, it's going to draw you a pentagon over and over again. The star tool is similar in that if you tap, it's going to ask you for 2 radiuses. It's going to ask you for the inside radius and the outside radius, and so that's saying from the center of the star to the outmost part, and then the center of the star to where the outmost parts are intersecting. So if I just do a standard 5-point star, you'll see that the radius from this center to this outmost point is the 50 points, and this center to the inside point here is 25. The lens flare tool, I'm not going to actually show because it's pretty situational and not particularly useful for fashion designers. It is more of like an effect that you can apply to an artwork or something, but for the most part, it's not something that I have ever really used very much in my career. Now, one additional thing that you can do to create more perfect shapes is you can utilize the Shift key. So when you utilize the Shift key in Illustrator, it's generally constraining something to a proportion. So if I have my rectangle shape tool selected, I of course can draw a shape like this. But if I want it to be a square, and I don't care what size it is per se, but I just want it to be a perfect square where all sides are the same length, I can hold Shift and drag. And that's going to create my perfect square. The same principle is relevant to the ellipse tool, where this will allow you to draw perfect circles. The ellipse tool, of course, really draws ovals for the most part if you are just freehanding it. But if you utilize the Shift key, then you will be able to draw a perfect circle. Same principle really for polygon tool and the star tool. Holding Shift is just going to constrain it to be a perfect proportion. And additionally, if you utilize any of these transform tools, so when you see I select this rectangle, there's these little 2 arrows around the corner. This just allows me to freely rotate the shape. But if I hold Shift, it will constrain the rotation to 45-degree angle axis rotation. So it's always going to rotate on a 45. So the Shift key is super, super useful and is something I'm using all the time, so it's good to get familiar with utilizing it. Now, one additional thing that you can do is you can hold Option as well. And when you're utilizing a shape tool and pressing Option, the main difference that's going to happen is that you are going to be drawing from wherever your cursor is placed. So as you can see, I have my cursor placed here. If I click and drag, the cursor goes outwards. However, if I hold Option, I start at the center of the shape. So I'm setting the center of the shape to start. Additionally, you can also press Shift here, and that will create your perfect square, your perfect circle, your perfectly constrained star, whatever shape you're working with. So being able to utilize Shift and Option can make it a lot easier for drawing up artwork, or for drawing a detail or something, or you need a concentric circle or concentric square. And so being cognizant of both is super important.